This Malaysian Laksa soup is aromatic, it's pungent, it's creamy, it's enriching, and it's good for the soul. I can't think of any more superlatives for it. It's incredibly tasty and it's much more simple than you'd think to cook. So let's get underway. Firstly, before we make the laksa soup, we're going to cook the noodles for the dish. So what we need is a packet of rice noodles like so, and you're going to cook approximately one of these little parcels per person. So this recipe is for 4 people, so obviously I'm going to pop 4 of these into the pot. And we cook these for about 3 to 4 minutes until they're nice, soft, slightly translucent, and then we'll come back when those are ready, strain them and make the broth. Those are now cooked nicely. We're simply going to pop a plate over the top to keep those warm, to then pour the broth over the top of them. And now it's time to make the broth. So we're going to start with 3 tablespoons of any vegetable oil. I actually really like a nutty oil, so I'm going to use groundnut oil in this instance. So 3 tablespoons of that, into which we're going to add a jar of shop-bought laksa paste, and I will include a recipe to make your own. Quite frankly, unless it's a special occasion, I don't bother. I just find that it's easier to use one of these pre-bought jars. And we'll simply spoon that onto that oil, and you'll hear that start to sizzle immediately. Now be ready to get very hungry if you're cooking this on an empty stomach, because the aromatic, wonderful flavors really are amazing. Just make sure you get all of that out. And what I normally do, just to make sure that we get all of the paste which is left inside, is add a little bit of the stock that we're going to be adding to this later, and just give the jar, because otherwise you're wasting quite a chunk of that paste. And just give that a good stir to make sure that it starts to sizzle nicely in that groundnut oil. It really does smell heavenly. And now into that, we're simply going to add 1 can of coconut milk. What is of the utmost importance is that it's full fat coconut milk, because frankly, this recipe just does not work properly if you use a reduced fat version. I've tried it before at a point when I was watching the pounds, and I found it split really easily, and it just didn't have the depth of flavor that a laksa soup should have. And we'll just let that simmer nicely. And you'll see that coconut milk, any solids which are in it, you'll see those just very nicely melting into it. Really does make it smell even more heavenly than it did, if that is imaginable. Into that, we are going to add some kefir lime leaves, and I'm going to pop in half a dozen. Three, 4, 5, there we go. 6 of them nicely popped in there. And just let some of that coconut milk solid start to melt properly. And then into that, I'm going to pour 1.5 litres of fish stock. Now, if you're doing this with pork, which is the other common variant of laksa soup, then feel free to use a meat stock or a chicken stock, which gives a great depth of flavour. Sometimes I use vegetable in it, but in this instance, because it's a pescatarian version, I'm using fish stock. So as I say, 1.5 litres in there. And then at this point, it's worth tasting to see exactly how salty the broth is. In this instance, not very. I always like to try it before I start to add fish sauce, because some of the sauces or the pastes can have a very high salt content, and then you end up with something which is almost unbearable to eat. So put approximately 1 tablespoon of fish sauce into that broth. This may look like I'm putting out more, but it's just because very little comes out of this bottle. So I assure you that is only approximately a tablespoon. Then into that, a teaspoon of salt, a tablespoon full of sugar, and finally, in this, I have juiced 2 limes. Now, I'm not going to add it all at the one time, because it's one of the most common mistakes with laksa soup. Sometimes people just add all the lime juice at the one time, and actually, it can't hold it. It makes it much too zingy and citrusy. And the golden rule, if you have added slightly too much sugar or salt or lime juice, the golden rule is to add a little bit of the other one, because it tends to balance it out a little bit. But if you taste as you go along, hopefully you shouldn't fall into that trap. And in this case, that could hold more lime, so I'll put the juice of both of those limes. And they were quite small limes anyway. That actually also felt like it could hold a little bit more salt. So I'm going to keep stirring this, leave it on that medium heat, and stir it for about 6 to 7 minutes, because I don't want to add the prawns yet. Those are very much so a last minute addition, because they're lovely, juicy, plump, raw king prawns. And obviously they only take about 2 minutes to cook, so we don't want to overcook those. So 6 or 7 minutes with this, then we'll come back and we'll add the prawns, and then we'll start to assemble this in our dishes. That has now been simmering nicely for 6 to 7 minutes. So before I do anything else, I want to fish out those lime leaves, because they don't make the best of tastes when you're enjoying the broth. And I think I've managed to get all 6 of them. Yeah, that's all of them. Lovely. So now we've got all of those out, it's time to add the second carton of coconut milk. Now, some people add this at the start. Personally, I don't. They put both of them in together. I don't actually like doing that, purely because in summer, I am happy to stick with 1 can, because it's lighter, it's more fragrant, whereas in the winter, you want that gorgeously creamy and super thick, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. So this can will just give it an extra depth and make it a truly, truly creamy laksa soup. And that's already starting to disintegrate in that, because it's at a nice heat from us simmering it. And now it's time to put in our raw prawns. This is 2 bags, so 2 bags of frozen that I have defrosted. So they're approximately 200, 225 grams, any of the supermarket brands. So that's about 400, 450 grams of raw king prawns. Going to cook that, I've turned the heat right down now. Going to cook that for about 2 to 3 minutes. That's all it's going to take until those prawns are ready. And I mean, if I lift one out, as you can see, look, the color's already started to change beautifully. So I'm going to give that about another 2 minutes, and then I'm going to put it over the noodles and do the window dressing. That broth has had those 2 minutes, the prawns are nicely cooked, and we're ready to dish up. So we want to start with our bowl of noodles, which have kept most of their heat, as you can see, because they're steaming. I'm not sure if that's being picked up, but they've kept most of their heat. So we just want to know, the problem is they are going to be slightly sticky at the moment, but don't worry about that, because once the broth goes on them, it'll get rid of that. So this is actually a recipe for 4 people, and you may have noticed that I'm using 3 bowls. Obviously, because of lockdown, we're not allowed to have guests. But I do sometimes make an extra bowl and leave it outside my neighbour's door. And he's very kindly said he doesn't need any tonight. So I'm just going to be fat, and we're going to share 4 portions of it between 3 people. So that's all those noodles nicely in there. Good Lord, that this bowl seems to be very heavily loaded. And now we simply want to start to layer. Ladle this gorgeous broth on top of the noodles. Make sure you fill it up nicely, because the goodness is in that broth and all the flavour is in it. So yeah, as you can see, make sure you fill the bowl very, very heartily. Don't scrimp with the laksa. And you can see what that second tin of coconut milk did for it. But as I say, if you're watching calories, rather than put in low-fat milk, just use 1 of full fat. In the winter, I always recommend the 2, but in the summer, a bit like a pho, the way a pho broth is lighter than this, or the way a jungle curry would be in Thai food. That's the consistency I like it in the summer months, because it's kind of too heavy if it has the full 2 tins of coconut milk in it. As you can see, there's quite a chunk of that broth left. As I said, this should have been for 4 people, and whilst I was able to spread the noodles out, the broth just proves to be slightly too much. So what I will do with the rest of that is keep it and have it for lunch tomorrow, which will be divine. Now, time for the window dressing. It's time to make it look just as pretty as me. So this is our selection of accoutrements and window dressing that's gonna go on them. And we will start layering it up with the bean sprouts. So a good dollop of bean sprouts on top of each one of those. And if you've done it properly, they won't all sink if there's a good noodle ratio. And look at that. Generations of laksa cooking. Malaysian people would be impressed at that skill. Then we are going to pop some coriander around that, just like so. Oh, it came over all Tommy Cooper there. Just like that. And then we are going to pop a handful of spring onions, or scallions as we call them in Ireland. None of this spring onion malarkey. Just pop those scallions nicely over the top. Look, I keep really doing the last bowl out of everything I'm plating it up with. And then we want to have some chili sprinkled on top of that. Just remember, wash those hands after the chili. Do not rub it into your eyes, or even worse, pop to the bathroom. So that's all of those layered up. And now we just want to pop on top of all of that, finally, a wedge of lime. And that will bring all of this to life. And there you have it. It is fairly quick, much quicker than most people would suspect, especially if you use a paste. It's quick, it's tasty, it's creamy, it's filling, it's satisfying. I can't think of any more descriptives for it. Go enjoy it. It's the laksa soup. Would you believe it?